Just tell me when she's dead, Mark. I can't fly back twice. The line came through my phone, tinny and sharp. It was my daughter, Lisa. My son, Mark, must have put her on speaker and then forgot to hang up the call properly. I heard the faint sound of airport announcements in the background of his phone. I sat there on my sofa, the receiver still pressed to my ear. The hum of the old refrigerator was the only sound in my small house. My thumb pressed the red button, and the line went dead. Silence. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, each second dropping like a stone into a deep well. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece. There was a photo of Mark and Lisa, taken at a county fair 30 years ago. They had candy floss stuck to their cheeks and were smiling with all their teeth. I had sewn Lisa's little sundress myself on a machine I bought with trading stamps. I didn't cry. The feeling wasn't hot like anger or cold like grief. It was clear, like the moment the air stills right before a storm. I stood up, smoothed my apron, and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. The water started to heat up with a low rumble. I remembered the smell of machine oil and hot fabric. Lisa was 16 and wanted a prom dress, a silky blue one from the department store downtown. It cost more than our grocery budget for 2 weeks. So I went to the fabric store instead. I stayed up for 3 nights, the whir of the sewing machine filling the house while everyone slept. My fingers were pricked and sore. When I finished, the dress hung on her door, shimmering under the hallway light. She never said thank you. She just said, "It's not the same as the store one." But she wore it. For Mark, it was my mother's gold locket. He needed $500 for a deposit on his first apartment after college. He was too proud to ask his father. I took the locket to a pawn shop on a rainy Tuesday. The man behind the counter had greasy hair and didn't even look me in the eye. I told my husband, Frank, that I'd lost it in the garden. He helped me search for hours in the dirt, his big, kind hands sifting through soil. I never told Mark where the money came from. The empty velvet box is still in my jewelry case. A little square of nothing. For 5 years, I got nothing back. Just a Christmas card with their names printed by a computer. Not even signed. The next week, I had my regular checkup with Dr. Miller. The office smelled of antiseptic and old magazines. He was a good man, had been my doctor for 20 years. He looked at my chart over his glasses. "Eleanor, your blood pressure is a little high," he said. "Nothing to panic about. We'll just watch the salt in your diet." An idea began to form in my mind. It was small and quiet, like a seed. That afternoon at the grocery store, I saw Sarah Jenkins in the produce aisle. Sarah was a nurse at the local hospice. We knew each other from the church potluck. Her macaroni and cheese was famous. "How are you holding up, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice warm. She was checking the ripeness of an avocado. "Oh, you know, the usual aches and pains," I said. We chatted for a bit about her work. She said the hardest part was often dealing with the families, not the patients. That evening, I sat in my quiet living room, the television on, with the sound turned low. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number in California. I took a deep breath and made my voice sound thin, shaky. "Mark, honey," I whispered. "The doctor called. It's not good news." They arrived 2 days later. The front door opened and a wave of expensive perfume washed over me, erasing the familiar smell of my lemon polish. Lisa swept in first, her coat perfectly tailored, her face a mask of careful concern. She wrapped her arms around me. It felt like hugging a coat rack. "Mother, you look so frail." Her eyes weren't looking at my face. They were scanning the silver candlesticks my mother had left me, sitting on the dining room buffet. Mark came in behind her, pulling a rolling suitcase that rattled on the old hardwood floors. His hug was quick, just 2 pats on my back. "We came as soon as we could, Mom." He was looking past me, at a small crack in the ceiling plaster. "They moved through my house like strangers, or worse, like inspectors." Lisa ran her finger over the dusty top of the piano. Mark tapped a wall in the hallway, as if checking its sturdiness. "They didn't ask me how I was feeling. They didn't ask if I needed anything. They sat me down in my favorite armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern worn smooth over the years. Lisa brought me a cup of tea in one of the good china cups, the ones I only used for special occasions. The tea was lukewarm. "Mum, we need to be practical," Mark said, his voice the same one he probably used with his clients. Smooth and reasonable. "Have you thought about your final arrangements?" "And the house, Mother," Lisa added, leaning forward. "We need to understand your wishes for the house. It's a big responsibility." They spoke about my life as if it were a business to be closed down. My things, my home, my final breath. Just items on a checklist. Then, the doorbell chimed. I knew who it was. Sarah Jenkins stood on the porch, holding a casserole dish wrapped in a tea towel. The warmth from it reached me even from the door. "Just thought you could use a hot meal, Eleanor," she said, with a genuine smile. The smell of baked cheese and tomatoes filled the entryway. My children looked up, their faces tight with annoyance. It was as if a real person had just walked into the middle of their very private negotiation. "This is Sarah Jenkins," I said, my voice steady. "She's a friend from my church." Lisa gave Sarah a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How thoughtful of you to bring that." She gestured at the casserole dish. It was a beautiful ceramic one, painted with bluebirds. "It's no trouble," Sarah said, stepping inside and placing the warm dish on the coffee table. "Just a little something. I know how things can get." She looked at me, really looked at me, with warmth in her eyes. Mark stood with his arms crossed, watching her like she was trying to sell him something. "Are you a nurse?" Mark asked. His tone was sharp, like an attorney's. "Yes, at the hospice downtown," Sarah answered calmly. She didn't seem bothered by his coldness. My children exchanged a quick look. I knew what they were thinking. Hospice. It made my little story more real to them. It fit right into their plans. "Well, thank you for stopping by," Lisa said, already guiding Sarah toward the door. "Mother needs her rest." The next morning, I woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing in the spare bedroom. I found Lisa in there, going through old photo albums. The air smelled of dust and old paper. "Just organizing, Mother," she said, not looking up. "So much clutter." She pulled out a picture of me and her father, Frank, on our honeymoon. We were standing by a lake, young and smiling. "This frame is real silver. We should have it appraised." Later, Mark was in the garage. He was measuring the walls. "Just thinking about the space, Mom," he said when he saw me. "A lot of potential here. Good storage." They moved through my memories like they were sorting merchandise. They didn't ask about the stories behind the photographs. They didn't remember the little wooden boat their father had carved for Mark, which sat on a dusty shelf. They saw price tags. They saw square footage. I went back to my armchair and picked up my knitting. The soft wool felt comforting in my hands. The click-clack of the needles was a steady, familiar rhythm. They decided to tackle my finances on Wednesday. They sat at my small kitchen table, a stack of my papers between them. The bank statements, the pension notices, my social security letters. I made them coffee, and they complained it was too weak. "This is it?" Lisa asked, tapping a finger on my savings account statement. The balance was modest, It was what Frank and I had managed to put away. There's not much here for end-of-life care. The house is the main asset, Mark said, his voice low. He circled a number on a piece of paper. The property taxes are high, but the market value is solid. They spoke as if I were already gone, a set of numbers on a page. I just sat on a kitchen chair, sipping my own coffee, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. They thought my silence was weakness, a sign of fading away. They didn't understand that a person can be quiet and still be listening to every single word. On Friday, Mark and Lisa said they had an appointment. "Just some errands to run, Mother," Lisa said, kissing the air near my cheek. Her perfume lingered after they left. 15 minutes later, Sarah Jenkins knocked on my door. I had called her that morning. She came in with a small pot of purple violets. She set them on the windowsill where the sun could catch the leaves. "They just needed a home," she said. She didn't talk about sickness or arrangements. We talked about her garden. She told me how to keep deer away from the tomatoes. I told her about the year Frank tried to grow a giant pumpkin and it split open a week before the fair. "He was so disappointed," I said, a real smile touching my lips. "He scooped it all out and I made 6 pumpkin pies." "That sounds just like him," Sarah said, even though she'd never met my husband. She had a way of listening that made you feel seen. We sat for an hour, the house filled with easy quiet and the scent of fresh soil from the little potted plant. They came back in the late afternoon. They carried a glossy folder with a picture of a peaceful garden on the front. They sat me down again, in the same armchair. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, lighting up dust motes dancing in the air. "Mother, we found a wonderful place," Mark began. He opened the folder. It was a brochure for a facility called Golden Meadows. It had pictures of smiling, silver-haired people playing bingo. "They handle everything," Lisa said, her voice bright and false. "It would be so much easier for you. No more worrying about the house or bills." Easier for who? I wondered. They laid out the plan. I would sell my home of 40 years, and sign the equity over to this facility. It was a neat and tidy package. They had it all figured out. All I had to do was fade away on schedule. "Just tell me when she's dead," Lisa had said. Now she was handing me a brochure on how to do it conveniently. I looked at the glossy pictures of golden meadows, manicured lawns, and smiling strangers. It looked like a very pleasant, very expensive waiting room. I placed the brochure on the coffee table, right on top of a water ring left by Mark's glass. "It's a lot to think about," I said, my voice quiet. I folded my hands in my lap. "There's not much to think about, Mother," Lisa said, a little too brightly. "It's the most logical step. We've already spoken to them. They have a room available at the end of the month. They had it all planned, my end of the month." Mark was already on his phone, looking up moving companies. "We can get a service to pack everything up. They're very efficient." I watched them, 2 busy adults managing a project. My life. I cleared my throat. "Do you remember that little rocking chair in the attic? The one your grandfather made for you, Lisa?" Lisa didn't look up from her tablet. "I'm sure it's up there. We'll sort through all that later." They didn't see me. They only saw a list of tasks. That evening, while they were watching a loud action movie on television, I went to the kitchen and quietly dialed a number I knew by heart. The next morning, I told them I had my weekly appointment at the beauty parlor. The smell of their burnt toast hung in the air. "Do you want me to drive you, Mother?" Lisa asked, wiping crumbs from the counter. Her tone was the one you use for a toddler. "Are you sure you feel up to it?" I've been driving myself for 50 years, dear, I said, picking up my purse. I think I can manage a trip downtown. But I didn't go to the beauty parlor. I drove my old Buick to a quiet street lined with oak trees and parked in front of a brick building. The sign said, Davison and Son, attorneys at law. Mr. Davison had been my husband's friend. He smelled of old spice and coffee, just like he always had. His office was filled with dark wood and the soft ticking of a clock. He listened patiently as I spoke. I didn't cry. I just laid out the facts, simple and plain. They haven't called in 5 years, Arthur, I said. Now they're here to pack up my life before I'm even done living it. He nodded slowly, his face kind but serious. What do you want to do, Eleanor? I told him. My children were busy. They spent their days on their laptops at my dining room table, the same table where I had served them thousands of meals. They used words like equity and assets and probate. They were dividing up my world while I was still sitting in it. I brought them iced tea. Mark took a glass without looking up. We need to get an agent in here by Monday, he said to Lisa. The market is hot right now. What about her personal things? Lisa asked, scrolling through something on her screen. The china? The silver? It will take ages to sort. They talked about me in the third person, as if I were a ghost floating in the corner of the room. I sat in my armchair, watching the light change in the garden outside my window. The purple violets Sarah had brought were thriving on the sill. A thought came to me then, clear and sharp as a piece of glass. I didn't die. I just stopped being convenient. I whispered it to myself. And in that moment, I felt a strange sort of peace settle over me. The path ahead was clear. That afternoon, they went out to run errands. I knew they were meeting a real estate agent. The house was quiet after they left. The silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like my own. I went to the hall closet, the one that smelled of cedar and old wool coats. In the back, on the top shelf, was the heavy metal lockbox. I needed a small stool to reach it. It was heavy in my hands, a solid piece of my history with Frank. I sat on the floor and opened it. The key turned with a familiar, grating click. Inside were the documents Mr. Davison had asked for. The deed to the house, with my name and Frank's, signed in his strong, looping script. Our marriage certificate. My will, the old one, naming Mark and Lisa as my sole heirs. I touched the brittle paper of the deed. I remembered the day we signed it, how proud Frank had been. He had carried me over the threshold of this house. He would have wanted it to be a home, not just an asset to be liquidated. I carefully put the deed and the old will into my handbag and locked the box again. I met Sarah on a bench in the little park by the library. The air was warm, and it smelled of cut grass. Children were laughing on the playground nearby. I had called her and asked if she had time for a chat. She looked worried. Is everything all right, Eleanor? Are you feeling poorly? I feel better than I have in years, Sarah, I said. I looked at her hands. They were capable, kind hands. I had seen her hold the hands of people in their last moments, her face full of compassion. I need to ask a great favor of you, I began. I told her about my plan. I told her I was changing my will. I told her I was leaving my house, my home, to her. Her eyes widened. She started to shake her head. Eleanor, no, I couldn't possibly. That's for your children. My children have what they need, I said firmly. They have their lives. This house needs a heart. You were there for me when no one else was. You brought me a casserole when my own daughter was measuring my furniture. That's what family does. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The sound of the children playing seemed to get louder. Please, Sarah, I said, my voice soft but steady. Let me do this. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore. Sarah sat there on the park bench, just looking at me. The sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, making shifting patterns on the ground. She finally found her voice. Eleanor, this is too much, she whispered. My work. I do it because it's what I'm called to do, not for this. I know that, I said, putting my hand over hers. Her skin was warm. That's why it has to be you. This house needs someone who understands what a home is for. It's for living in, not just for selling. She was quiet for a long time, watching the children on the swings. I didn't push her. I just let the silence sit between us, comfortable and real. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes clear. If this is what you truly want, she said slowly, then I will honor your wishes, but only if you let me take care of you, as a friend, not as a patient. That's all I've ever wanted, I said. A weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. The next day, I went back to Mr. Davison's office. The air conditioning hummed softly in the quiet room. I placed the old will on his polished desk. I'm ready to make the changes, Arthur, I said. He picked up the document. He had already drafted the new one just as I'd asked. We went through it, line by line. It was simple and clear. My savings would be donated to the church's food pantry. My personal items, the little things, were to be offered to friends. And the house, my solid brick house with the rose bushes out front, would belong to Sarah Jenkins. Mark and Lisa were not mentioned. Are you certain, Eleanor? Mr. Davison asked one last time, his pen hovering over the paper. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied. I signed my name at the bottom. My handwriting was a little shaky, but the signature was firm. It felt like closing a door on a long, drafty hallway. My children grew more impatient by the day. They had a real estate agent come to the house, a woman named Brenda with a plastic smile and a clipboard. She walked through my rooms, tapping on walls and talking about curb appeal. The kitchen will need a full-gut job, Brenda said, looking at my clean, simple kitchen with distaste. And these carpets have to go. Lisa nodded eagerly. We know. We're prepared to make the necessary investments to get top dollar. I was sitting in the living room, listening to them discuss tearing my home apart. I felt a strange detachment, as if they were talking about someone else's house. Mark brought Brenda a glass of water. We want to move quickly, he told her, given the circumstances. He glanced at me, a flicker of something, pity, maybe, or just annoyance, in his eyes. I just smiled faintly and picked up my knitting. The plan was coming together. Sarah started visiting more often, always in the afternoons when Mark and Lisa were out making their arrangements. She never came empty-handed. One day, it was a jar of homemade strawberry jam. Another day, a book of crossword puzzles. We'd sit in the kitchen, the scent of her jam sweet in the air. We didn't talk about my health or my children. We talked about recipes and television shows and the squirrels that were stealing her birdseed. It was normal. It was life. One afternoon, she helped me in the garden. My knees aren't what they used to be, so she knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds from around my prize-winning roses. Her hands, usually so gentle with patience, were strong and capable in the soil. These are beautiful, Eleanor, she said, looking up at me, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Frank planted these, didn't he? He did, I said, my heart warming. He said a house wasn't a home without roses. She remembered. I had told her that once, just in passing. She had listened. The final piece was my doctor. I went for another checkup. Dr. Miller listened to my heart. the stethoscope cold against my skin. He looked at my chart. "Your blood pressure is back to normal, Eleanor," he said, peering at me over his glasses. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up. You're as healthy as a horse." I smiled. "That's wonderful news, doctor." He wrote a note on my chart. "So, are your children still visiting?" he asked, making small talk. "Oh yes," I said. "They've been so helpful, planning everything." He nodded, pleased. "Good. It's important to have family support." I folded the clean bill of health report he gave me and put it in my purse. It felt like a winning lottery ticket. I had all the pieces now. All I had to do was choose the right moment to put them on the table. The performance was nearly over. All that was left was the final act. Mark and Lisa decided to host a small gathering. "Just to say goodbye to a few of your old friends, Mother," Lisa explained. Her voice was syrupy sweet. It was clear they wanted to present a united front to the neighbours, show everyone what devoted children they were. They planned it for a Sunday afternoon. Lisa bought a bland sheet cake from the supermarket, the kind with waxy frosting that tastes like sugar and air. She arranged it on one of my good silver platters. The sight of it made me sad. I used to bake all their birthday cakes from scratch. Mark was on the phone in the backyard, talking loudly. "Yes, the estate is straightforward. We're anticipating a quick settlement." He paced back and forth across the lawn Frank had mowed for 40 years. I sat in my armchair, watching them. They were like actors in a play, and they had given me the smallest part, the dying mother. They didn't notice that I had chosen my best dress, a cheerful blue one. They didn't notice the little sparkle in my eye. The guests started to arrive. A few ladies from my church, a neighbour from down the street. They came in carrying covered dishes and sad smiles. The house filled with the smell of baked ham and polite sympathy. My children were excellent hosts. Mark refilled glasses. Lisa guided people toward me, whispering things like, "She has good days and bad days," and "She's very tired, but she wanted to see you all." They would pat my shoulder and tell me to rest. Mrs. Gable from next door brought her famous potato salad. She leaned in close to me. "You look wonderful, Eleanor," she whispered, her eyes sharp. "Much better than they're letting on." I just smiled and patted her hand. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Martha." My children ignored me. They were too busy networking, accepting condolences on my behalf. They were collecting praise for their sacrifice, for dropping their important lives to come and manage my death. Sarah arrived late. She came through the back door, just as I'd asked her to. She brought a simple bouquet of daisies from her own garden, tied with a piece of twine. She didn't have a sad look on her face. She just smiled at me. Lisa saw her, and her face tightened. "Oh, you came?" she said, her voice dripping with frost. "Mother is very weak. Please don't stay long." "I wouldn't dream of tiring her out," Sarah said, her voice calm and even. She walked over to me and handed me the daisies. They smelled of sunshine and earth. She squeezed my hand. A silent message passed between us. Soon. Mark came over, a plate of dry-looking crackers in his hand. "Can I help you?" he asked Sarah. It wasn't an offer. It was a dismissal. "I'm just visiting a friend," Sarah said, looking him straight in the eye. He was taller than her, but she didn't seem small. I decided it was time. I stood up from my armchair. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. Mark and Lisa immediately rushed to my side. "Mother, sit down," Lisa hissed. "You'll exhaust yourself." "I'm fine, dear," I said, my voice clear and strong. It didn't sound like the voice of a dying woman. I walked to the center of the living room. right next to the sad supermarket cake. "I want to thank you all for coming," I began. I looked around at the faces of my friends and neighbors. "And I want to thank my children, Mark and Lisa, for coming all this way to help me plan my final days." Mark and Lisa exchanged a smug look. They thought this was their moment of glory, the final, touching scene. "They've been so efficient," I continued. "They've hired a real estate agent. They've looked into facilities. They have been very practical about the whole thing." A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably. They were starting to sense that this wasn't a typical farewell speech. I paused and took a sip of water. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly in the silence. My children stood frozen, their smiles starting to look like masks. "Their planning gave me a lot of time to think," I said, "about what's really important, about what makes a family. It's not about blood. It's not about obligation." I turned and looked right at Sarah, who was standing quietly by the doorway. "It's about who shows up. It's about who brings you a casserole when you're lonely, not a brochure when they think you're dying." Then I looked at my children. Their faces had gone pale. The party atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. "And speaking of my health," I said, reaching into the pocket of my dress. I pulled out the folded-up report from Dr. Miller. "I have some wonderful news to share with all of you." I unfolded the single sheet of paper from Dr. Miller's office. The rustle of it was loud in the quiet room. "This is a copy of my latest medical report," I said, my voice as steady as a church bell on a clear morning. "According to Dr. Miller," I continued, looking directly at Mark and Lisa, "my blood pressure is perfect. My heart is strong. He says, and I quote, 'I am as healthy as a horse.'" A little gasp went through the room. Mrs. Gable from next door actually chuckled. Mark's face went slack, all the colour draining out of it. Lisa's perfect hostess smile froze and then cracked, like a china plate dropped on a tile floor. She looked from the paper in my hand to my face, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" she whispered. The word was barely a puff of air. "I am not dying," I said simply. "I was never dying." Before they could find their voices, I kept going. I had the stage, and I was not going to give it up. "But this whole experience," I said, my gaze sweeping over my friends, "has taught me a very important lesson about my final days. Whenever they may come, it taught me who my real family is." I turned my head and smiled at Sarah, who was still standing by the door holding her simple bunch of daisies. She looked as surprised as anyone. "So, I paid a visit to my lawyer, Mr. Davison," I announced. "I have made a new will. It is signed, witnessed, and legally binding. Everything I own, this house, my savings, the furniture you've been measuring, I am leaving to one person, the person who has been my family all along." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Mark and Lisa were staring at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "I am leaving my entire estate," I said, my voice ringing with clarity, "to Sarah Jenkins." The party ended quickly after that. It was like someone had pulled a plug and all the energy drained out of the room. People mumbled excuses, collected their casserole dishes, and slipped out the door. Mrs. Gable squeezed my arm on her way out. "Good for you, Eleanor," she whispered fiercely. Soon, it was just the four of us left in the living room. Me, Sarah, and my two children. The sad supermarket cake sat untouched on its silver platter. Lisa was the first to speak. Her voice was low and shaking with rage. "How could you? How could you humiliate us like this?" "Humiliate you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought I was saving you a trip." After all, you didn't want to have to fly back twice. Her face went pale, as if I had slapped her. She remembered her own words. Mark stepped forward, his lawyer face back on. This is ridiculous. She's a hospice nurse. She preyed on you. This is undue influence. We will fight this in court. You do what you feel you must, Mark, I said calmly. I sat back down in my armchair. It felt good to be off my feet. Arthur Davison is a very good lawyer. He made sure everything was done by the book. I was of perfectly sound mind. I still am. Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. I never asked for any of this. Your mother offered me a gift, and I accepted it as a friend. A friend? Lisa scoffed, her voice rising to a shriek. You're a vulture. You saw an old woman and you swooped in. Your mother was lonely, Lisa, Sarah said, not flinching. I brought her a casserole. You brought her a brochure for a nursing home. There's a difference. My children had no answer for that. They just stood there, breathing heavily, their faces ugly with anger. The expensive perfume Lisa wore suddenly smelled sour in the still air. They didn't sleep in the house that night. They went to a hotel. The next morning, they returned to pack their things. The sound of their suitcases rolling across the hardwood floor was the only sound in the house. They didn't speak to me. They moved with a grim, furious efficiency. They stripped the beds in their rooms, piling the sheets on the floor. When they were ready to leave, they stood in the entryway. Their rental car was waiting in the driveway, its engine humming. You'll regret this, Mark said, his voice flat and cold. When you're old and truly sick, you'll be all alone. I don't think I will be, I said, looking toward the kitchen where Sarah was quietly making a pot of tea. The warm, comforting scent of it was already starting to fill the house. Lisa just looked at me, her eyes full of a strange, empty bitterness. She didn't say goodbye. She just turned and walked out, pulling her suitcase behind her. The front door slammed shut, and the vibration ran through the floorboards of my quiet, peaceful, and finally, my very own home. After the door slammed, the silence in the house was different. It wasn't empty. It was calm. The grandfather clock in the hall kept ticking, but the sound was gentle now, like a heartbeat. Sarah came out of the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea. The steam rose in little puffs. She handed one to me. The warmth of the ceramic felt good in my hands. Are you all right, Eleanor? She asked, her voice soft. I took a sip of tea. It was strong and sweet, just the way I like it. I'm better than all right, Sarah, I said. I feel like I can finally breathe in my own home. We sat there for a while, not saying much. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room window, lighting up the dust motes. I looked at the untouched sheet cake on the coffee table. I don't suppose you want a piece of that sad cake, I said. Sarah laughed, a real warm laugh that filled the room. Not a chance, but I could go for some of Mrs. Gable's potato salad. The next week was strange and quiet. I kept expecting the phone to ring, to hear Mark's angry voice or Lisa's accusations, but there was nothing, just silence from California and New York. It was the same silence I had lived with for 5 years, but now it didn't hurt. It was just a fact. A letter arrived a few days later from a law firm I didn't recognize. It was full of big words and threats. They were contesting the will. They claimed I was not of sound mind. I read it, folded it neatly, and put it in a drawer. I called Mr. Davison. Let them try, Eleanor, he said, his voice calm and reassuring over the phone. We have the doctor's report. We have witnesses. They're just making noise. I believed him. I wasn't scared. The fear had left me that day at the party. What was left was a quiet kind of strength, like a deep-rooted old tree. Sarah and I fell into a comfortable routine. She still lived in her own small apartment, but she would come by after her shifts at the hospice. We would work in the garden together. My roses had never looked better. She taught me how to stake the tall tomato plants Frank had always struggled with. My hands, which had once sewn prom dresses and packed school lunches, learned the new feeling of cool earth and rough twine. The smell of the tomato leaves was sharp and green in the summer air. One evening, we were sitting on the back porch, watching the fireflies start to blink in the twilight. The air was warm and smelled of honeysuckle. "You know, you don't have to wait, Eleanor," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Wait for what?" I asked, watching a little bug light up near the bird bath. "For the house," she said. "We could have Mr. Davison change the deed now. Put it in my name. Then there would be nothing for your children to fight over later." I looked at her. Her face was earnest in the fading light. It was a practical solution. It was a smart solution. It was the kind of thing Mark would have suggested. "No," I said, after a moment. "I don't think so." She looked surprised. "But why not? It would make everything simpler." "Because this is still my home, Sarah," I said, patting the worn arm of my wicker chair. "I lived my life here. I raised my children here. I said goodbye to my husband in this house. I'm not ready to give it up just yet. Not until I have to." She nodded slowly, understanding. "Of course. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said. "It's enough to know it will be in good hands, that it will be a home for someone who deserves one." We sat in comfortable silence again as the sky turned a deep purple. The crickets started their evening song. I felt a deep sense of peace. This was my home, and I would live in it, on my own terms, until the very end. A few weeks later, I was at the grocery store, deciding between peaches and plums. I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Eleanor, I heard what happened." It was Martha Gable. She was holding a carton of eggs. "News travels fast in a small town," I said with a smile. "I think it was wonderful," she said, lowering her voice. "My son is the same. Only calls when he needs his gutters cleaned. You stood up for all of us." She patted my arm, then looked at my shopping cart. "You know," she said, "the church is starting a new book club, Wednesday mornings. We could use a sensible voice like yours." I looked at the peaches in my hand. They felt solid and real. A book club. It sounded nice. "I think I'd like that very much, Martha," I said. It felt like planting a new seed in my own garden. A small, hopeful start to whatever came next. I joined the Wednesday morning book club. We met in the church basement, which always smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax. There were 6 of us. We read novels and mysteries, and mostly we just talked. One morning, Martha Gable was telling us about her grandson's science fair project. He needed old jars for it. "He's trying to build a worm farm," she said, rolling her eyes. "I don't have nearly enough jars." "I have a whole shelf of them in the pantry," I said. "Frank used to save them for storing nails and screws." The next day, I packed up a sturdy box with 24 clean glass jars. Martha's grandson, a shy boy named Leo with big glasses, came to pick them up. He looked at the jars like they were treasure. "Wow. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson," he said, his eyes wide. "This is perfect." He left with the box, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. It was such a small thing, a box of old jars. But it was useful. I was useful. Not as an asset to be managed, but as a person with a pantry full of things someone might need. The lawyer's letters from my children eventually stopped. Mr. Davison called to tell me they had dropped their case. There was nothing to contest. I felt a quiet sense of relief, but not triumph. It was just the end of a chapter. I didn't hear from them. I didn't expect to. I took their pictures off the mantelpiece, the one from the county fair, and their graduation photos. I didn't throw them away. I put them in the old cedar chest in the attic, along with Lisa's prom dress and the empty velvet box that once held my mother's locket. They were part of a life that was over now. In their place, I put a framed photo of Sarah and me in the garden, covered in dirt and smiling, and a picture of my new friends from the book club, all of us laughing over a slice of pie. The mantel looked brighter. It looked like my life now. One autumn afternoon, Sarah came over with 2 big pumpkins. We sat at the kitchen table and carved them, just like I used to do with the children. The kitchen filled with the earthy, sweet smell of pumpkin guts. "I have some news," she said, scooping out seeds with a big spoon. "I met someone." "Oh?" I said, trying to get the triangle eye on my pumpkin just right. "His name is David," she said, a little blush on her cheeks. "He's a teacher at the high school. He's very kind." I looked at her, at the genuine happiness in her face. "That's wonderful, Sarah. I'm so happy for you." And I truly was. My life was calm, and hers was just beginning a new story. It felt right. The house was big enough for all of it. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Book club on Wednesdays, gardening with Sarah, Sunday service. I started walking every morning, just down to the end of the block and back. The air was crisp and clean. I noticed things I hadn't seen in years. The way the frost made patterns on the neighbours' lawns, the cheerful red of the cardinals in the bare trees. I didn't feel lonely. My days were full, but not busy. They were full of small, good things. The taste of a perfect cup of tea, the weight of a good book in my lap, the sound of a friend's laughter in my kitchen. I thought about Mark and Lisa sometimes, not with anger anymore, just with a kind of distant sadness. They had wanted to manage my death. They had been so focused on the end of my story that they had missed the fact that I was still living it, and that the last chapters might be the best of all. This morning I woke up early. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. I put on my robe and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The house was quiet, filled with the gentle morning light. Through the window I could see my garden. The roses were dormant now, resting for the winter. The tomato stakes stood like little soldiers in the turned earth. Everything was waiting patiently for spring. I poured my coffee into my favourite mug, the one with the bluebirds on it. I took it out to the back porch and wrapped my old, soft blanket around my shoulders. The air was cold, but the coffee was hot. I sat in my wicker chair, the same one where I had sat with Sarah, and watched the sun come up over the rooftops. The world was waking up, and so was I. And I had all the time in the world.